The 911 operator probably thought I was the one having a breakdown, not the woman screaming bloody murder on my own front porch. Her voice, a shrill and piercing shriek that could shatter glass, echoed through the quiet pines. He's trying to break in. He's a trespasser. Send the police. He's threatening me. I stood there, holding my own house keys, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, just staring at her. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it all was breathtaking. I'm just a guy who wanted peace. My name is Alex. For 8 years, I was a logistics officer in the military, which is a fancy way of saying I organize chaos for a living. I tracked millions of dollars of equipment across continents, planned supply chains through hostile territory, and learned to see the world as a series of systems, inputs, and outputs. When I got out, I transitioned those skills to the corporate world, wrangling data for a tech company. It paid well, but it was loud. The open plan office, the constant chatter, the city itself. It was a relentless assault on the senses. So I bought this cabin. It was my escape hatch, nestled in a small, sleepy community with a barely there homeowners association. It was perfect. The HOA, from what I could gather, was mostly a formality to manage the single road and a small community well. The president was a woman named Karen. Yes, her actual name was Karen. She seemed like a harmless, if slightly overzealous, busybody at first. She introduced herself the day I moved in, clipboard in hand, pointing out minor infractions at neighboring properties with a grim satisfaction. I just smiled, nodded, and planned to keep to myself. My plan for peaceful solitude was working beautifully until a major project came up at work. It required me to be on-site at a different campus for 3 months. It was a good opportunity, so I packed my bags, locked up the cabin, and as a courtesy, I gave Karen a heads up. I told her I'd be gone until the end of the summer, just so she wouldn't think the place was abandoned if the grass got a little long. She smiled a tight, thin-lipped smile and said, "Thank you for being so considerate, Alex. We'll keep an eye on things." I should have paid more attention to the glint in her eye. I should have recognized the look of a predator spotting an opportunity. The project, however, finished a whole month ahead of schedule. Eager to get back to my sanctuary, I didn't call ahead. I just packed my car and drove the 6 hours back, dreaming of sitting on my porch with a cold beer, listening to nothing but the wind in the trees. I pulled on my gravel driveway just after dusk, and the first thing I noticed was that the lights were on. All of them. My heart started pounding. Had I been robbed? Did I leave them on for a month straight? Then I saw the unfamiliar rental car parked in my spot. I got out of my car, my old military instincts kicking in, my senses on high alert. I walked up to my own front door and could hear music and laughter inside. My door. My house. Before I could even process what to do next, the door swung open. A young couple, looking confused, stood there. And behind them, walking out onto the porch with a proprietary air, was Karen. She saw me, and for a split second, her face was a mask of pure panic. But it was only a second. Then the mask shifted into one of righteous indignation. She pointed a trembling finger at me and started to scream. And that's when she called 911, painting me as a dangerous intruder on my own property. What she didn't know was that my job isn't just about spreadsheets and data models. It's about finding patterns, identifying vulnerabilities, and planning complex operations with military precision. She hadn't just inconvenienced a homeowner. She had declared war on a logistician. She had created a problem, and my entire professional life had been about solving problems permanently and efficiently. She thought I was some quiet tech nerd she could steamroll. She thought her self-appointed authority and a loud voice were all the power she needed. It was a fatal error in judgment, a catastrophic miscalculation. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She had no idea of the storm of organized, data-driven hell that was about to break over her head. Have you ever dealt with someone so completely, bafflingly entitled that they genuinely believed your property, your rights, your very existence was subject to their whims? Let me know in the comments, because in that moment, standing on my own lawn being accused of trespassing, I felt profoundly, cosmically alone in my disbelief. This isn't just a story about an HOA nightmare. Those are a dime a dozen. This is a story about how a little bit of data, a touch of strategic planning, and a whole lot of methodical patience can bring an empire of arrogance crashing down into a pile of dust and legal fees. Stick around, because this is the detailed, step-by-step field manual for dismantling a petty tyrant. It gets good. The wail of the approaching sirens cut through Karen's theatrical shrieks. Two deputies pulled up, their expressions weary, the kind of look cops get when they know they're walking into a messy domestic squabble. Karen immediately launched into her performance, a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched a sheaf of papers to her chest. "Thank God you're here, officers," she wailed, pointing at me. "This man, I've never seen him before. He's trying to force his way into the community guest cabin. These poor people," she gestured to the bewildered young couple, now hovering in my doorway, "are terrified." The deputies, a younger man and a more seasoned-looking woman, exchanged a glance. The woman, Sergeant Miller, addressed me. "Sir, can you tell me what's going on here?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. My training taught me that the first person to lose their cool in a confrontation often loses the entire engagement. "Yes, ma'am," I said, my voice even. "My name is Alex Sterling. This is my house. I've been away on a work assignment and just returned this evening." Karen scoffed loudly. "Lies. This property was repossessed by the Homeowners Association for non-payment of special assessments. It's an official HOA guest house now." She thrust the papers at Sergeant Miller. I caught a glimpse of them. It was a document she'd clearly typed up on her own computer, using a fancy cursive font for the letterhead, Serenity Pines Homeowners Association. It looked laughably amateurish, but in the heat of the moment, it was a prop, and she was using it effectively. Sergeant Miller looked at the document, her face unreadable. "And you are?" she asked Karen. "I am Karen Bishop, the president of the HOA," she declared, puffing out her chest. "I have the rental agreement right here for our guests, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson." She produced another document, a generic rental template she'd likely downloaded, with the couple's names filled in. The Hendersons just looked mortified, caught in the crossfire. I held up my hand. "Sergeant, may I?" She nodded. I walked to my car, retrieved my briefcase, and pulled out a folder. I handed her my driver's license, which clearly listed 12 Serenity Lane as my address. Then I handed her a copy of the property deed, also in my name. Finally, I showed her the electric bill on my phone's email app, addressed to Alex Sterling at this very location. "This is my home," I repeated, my voice firm but respectful. "I have never received any notice of foreclosure, repossession, or unpaid assessments from any legitimate entity." Sergeant Miller looked from my official documents to Karen's homemade ones. The younger deputy was starting to look at Karen with a skeptical frown. But the law, as I was about to learn, could be a blunt instrument. "Ma'am," Miller said to Karen, "he has a deed to the property." Karen was ready for this. "That's an old deed. The HOA lien and repossession is more recent. It's all filed with our lawyers. It was a complete fabrication, but it introduced just enough doubt." Miller sighed, rubbing her temples. "Look, we can't evict these people," she said, nodding to the Hendersons. "They have what appears to be a lease agreement. And we can't arrest you," she said to me, "because you have documents showing you own the place. This is a civil matter. You're going to have to take it to court." And that was it. The police couldn't help. They advised me to find somewhere else to stay for the night and to contact a lawyer. They left, and I was left standing in my own driveway, effectively locked out of my own house by a screaming lunatic and a flawed system. Karen gave me a triumphant, venomous smirk as she herded the Hendersons back inside and shut the door. The battle was over, and she had won, or so she thought. That night, I booked a room at a cheap motel. The next morning, I decided to try one last time to resolve this like a rational adult. I walked up to Karen's house, a few streets over from mine, and knocked on the door. When she answered, her face soured. "What do you want?" she snapped. I kept my tone level. "Karen, this is my house. You know it's my house. This has gone far enough. Let's just end this now. Have your guests leave, give me the money you collected from them, and we can pretend this entire insane episode never happened. No lawyers, no courts. I thought it was a generous offer. a chance for her to retreat without total humiliation. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she threw her head back and laughed. It was a harsh, grating sound. "You have some nerve," she cackled. "You think you can intimidate me? I am the president of this HOA. You are the one who is trespassing. I have a lawyer, and he's already drawing up the paperwork to have you formally barred from this community. You'll be hearing from him." With that, she slammed the door in my face. An hour later, I saw her tacking a notice to the community bulletin board. In large, bold letters, it read, "Community Alert. Harassment of HOA president and fraudulent property claims by former resident Alex Sterling. All residents are advised to report any contact to the board immediately." She hadn't just doubled down, she tripled down. She was escalating, and in doing so, she had closed the door on any peaceful resolution. My attempt at a reasonable off-ramp had failed. Fine. From now on, we would do things my way. Back in my sterile motel room, the frustration began to recede, replaced by a cold, familiar clarity. The kind of clarity I used to get when a supply convoy was ambushed and we had to reroute 3 battalions worth of equipment through hostile territory on the fly. The objective was clear: reclaim my property and ensure Karen faced consequences for her actions. The enemy was overconfident, operating on faulty intelligence and a sense of untouchable authority. It was time to shift from homeowner to analyst. My first step was to review the foundational documents. When I bought the cabin, I was given a thick packet of paperwork, including the HOA's Articles of Incorporation and the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, or CC and RS. I'd skimmed them at the time, but now I read them word for word, highlighting key phrases and making notes. What I found was illuminating. The HOA was established in the late 1970s. The bylaws were incredibly vague, written for a time when neighbors settled disputes over a fence post, not with fraudulent legal documents. They granted the board the power to collect modest annual dues for road maintenance and manage the community well. They could issue fines for specific listed violations, like junk cars or unapproved structures. But nowhere, not in a single sentence, did it grant the HOA the authority to issue special assessments without a majority vote of all homeowners, let alone the power to place a lien on or repossess a property for non-payment. Karen was operating almost entirely outside the scope of her actual authority. Her power wasn't based on legal standing. It was based on bluff and intimidation. With that established, I moved on to her current operation, the illegal renting of my cabin. I remembered the last name of the couple, Henderson. A quick search of social media for Henderson, and the name of our town yielded a public profile of a young woman who had just posted a photo of herself on my porch. The caption read, "Enjoying a little getaway at the Serenity Pines guest house. Such a cute and cozy spot." Bingo! She'd given me the name Karen was using for the rental. I typed Serenity Pines guest house into a popular short-term rental website, and there it was. My cabin, my furniture, my goddamn throw pillows. The listing was filled with professional-looking photos, likely taken in the few days between when I left and when the first guests arrived. The host was listed only as Karen B., but the profile picture was a close-up of her prize-winning petunias, the same ones that sat in planters on her front porch. It was sloppy, arrogant. She didn't think she'd ever get caught. This was my aha moment. This was the digital trail that would lead directly to her. I immediately started a meticulous process of evidence collection. I took time-stamped screenshots of everything. The listing itself, the photos, the host profile, the house rules, which were a bastardized version of the real HOA rules, and, most importantly, the reviews. The reviews were a goldmine. There were dozens of them, stretching back nearly 2 months. People praised the cabin, but more importantly, they praised the host. Karen was such a wonderful and attentive host. She met us with the keys and gave us a tour. Thanks, Karen, for the great stay. Karen even left us a welcome basket with muffins from the local bakery. Each one was another nail, hammering down the connection between the illegal rental and Karen Bishop personally. But the real prize was the booking calendar. It was publicly viewable, showing which nights were booked and which were available. I couldn't see the price for past bookings, but I could see the current nightly rate, $295 a night with a 2-night minimum. I methodically went back through the calendar, screenshotting every month, counting the number of booked nights. I created a new spreadsheet, my natural habitat. Column A, date. Column B, booked status. Column C, estimated income. Even being conservative, I calculated that she had already pocketed over $10,000 for my property alone. This wasn't just a petty abuse of power anymore. This was a significant criminal enterprise. The data was telling a story, and I was just beginning to understand its plot. The scope of her deception was becoming clearer, and with it, the shape of my strategy. She thought her weapon was a homemade HOA notice. My weapon was a database, and I was about to build a case so airtight, so thoroughly documented, that by the time I was done, her little empire would be nothing but a crater. The data I had scraped from the rental website was damning, but it felt incomplete. If Karen was brazen enough to illegally rent out my cabin, a property owned by someone relatively young and likely to return, what might she be doing to others? My strategic sense told me this was likely not an isolated incident, but a pattern of behavior. I needed to understand the entire system she had built. My next phase was human intelligence gathering. I couldn't just storm through the neighborhood accusing the HOA president of being a criminal. That would put everyone on the defensive and give Karen time to cover her tracks. I needed a subtle approach. I started by taking walks around the community, stopping to chat with people I saw doing yard work. I'd start with a simple, non-threatening topic. Morning, I'm Alex from down on Serenity Lane. Just trying to get a handle on how things work around here. That special assessment Karen mentioned for the road repairs last month was a bit of a surprise, wasn't it? I was fishing, using a piece of her own lie as bait. The reactions were telling. Some people just shrugged, having paid the few $100s without question. But others, particularly the older residents on fixed incomes, would get a tight look around their mouths. One gentleman told me, "Seems like there's a special assessment for something every other month. My wife and I can barely keep up." This was the thread I needed to pull. My breakthrough came when I met Margaret. She was a widow in her late 70s who had lived in the community since it was first built. I found her tending her rose bushes and struck up a conversation. When I gently broached the subject of HOA fees, her friendly demeanor evaporated. She invited me inside for a cup of tea, and once the door was closed, she opened a drawer in her writing desk. It was stuffed with paper. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with anger. "My husband, George, he was the first president of this HOA. He wrote the bylaws himself. He would be spinning in his grave if he knew what she was doing." She pulled out a large accordion file. It was a meticulous, chronological paper trail of every notice, every invoice, and every threatening letter Karen had sent her over the past 3 years. The infractions were absurd. A $100 fine for a garden gnome deemed aesthetically discordant, a $250 fee for her newspaper being left on the driveway past 9 a.m., a $500 emergency assessment for a septic system survey that never happened. Margaret had paid some of them, scared of the liens Karen threatened, but she had kept copies of everything, along with her canceled checks. She was my first true ally, and her evidence was invaluable. It demonstrated a long-term pattern of racketeering and extortion targeting the community's most vulnerable residents. With Margaret's documents, a new, more sinister picture emerged. I suspected Karen wasn't just pocketing the rental income. She was using the HOA itself as a slush fund. The rental money was likely going directly to her, tax-free. The fraudulent fees she extorted from residents were probably deposited into the official HOA bank account, which she then used to pay for expenses related to her schemes, like cleaning fees for my cabin between guests or supplies for her personal gardening projects that she passed off as community beautification. It was a classic case of commingling funds designed to obscure the trail. I needed to find a way to prove it. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place almost by accident. I was looking up property records on the county website to see if Karen had ever actually filed a lien against anyone, and I decided on a whim to search for the HOA's business registration with the Secretary of State. I typed in Serenity Pines Homeowners Association. The result that came back made my jaw drop. Status: administratively dissolved. I clicked for details. The HOA had failed to file its annual report or pay its small registration fee 2 years in a row. According to the state, as a legal corporate entity, our HOA did not exist. It was defunct. Karen wasn't just acting outside her authority as HOA president. She was acting as the president of a ghost corporation. Every letter she sent, every check she cashed, every threat she made under the color of that authority was an act of fraud. This was the kill shot. This was the key that would unlock everything. I now had her on illegal property rental, extortion, and widespread fraud. The quiet data analyst from down the lane was now armed with enough evidence to not just get his house back, but to dismantle Karen's entire corrupt enterprise from the foundation up. The time for investigation was over. It was time to formulate the grand strategy. In the military, you don't go into battle without a comprehensive plan, complete with primary objectives, contingency plans, and a clear definition of victory. My victory wasn't just getting my keys back. It was ensuring Karen was held fully accountable, that the money she stole was returned, and that no one in this community would ever be victimized by her again. My plan would be a multi-pronged assault, targeting her from legal, public, and regulatory angles simultaneously. She wouldn't know what hit her until it was far too late. The first prong was the legal trap. I knew from her arrogant dismissal of me that she felt untouchable. I needed to use that arrogance against her. I couldn't just sue her. That would take months, even years. I needed her to incriminate herself in writing, in her official and fraudulent capacity as president. I contacted a lawyer, not to start a lawsuit, but for a single, specific task, to draft a formal, intimidating-looking cease and desist letter. The letter would demand she and her guests immediately vacate my property, cease all rental activity, and provide a full accounting of the income she had received. It would cite specific state statutes regarding property law, trespass, and corporate fraud. I knew she wouldn't comply. I also knew she was too cheap and too arrogant to hire a real lawyer to respond. I predicted she would respond herself, on her fake HOA letterhead, doubling down on her lies and threats. That response would become a cornerstone of my case, a signed confession in essence. The second prong was the public takedown. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled in just 2 weeks. According to Margaret, it was usually a pathetic affair, with Karen, her husband, and 2 or 3 other cronies attending, passing whatever motion she wanted without opposition. This year would be different. This would be our theater of operations. I would use the meeting to expose her in front of the entire community she claimed to lead. Margaret and I would work together to quietly rally the other homeowners who had been wronged. We would turn her stage into her scaffold. The third prong was the digital ambush. I would consolidate all my evidence into a clear, compelling, and utterly irrefutable presentation. It wouldn't be a dry recitation of facts. It would be a story. I would use my data analysis skills to create powerful visuals, a timeline of the illegal rentals synced with guest reviews, a map pinpointing my cabin, an infographic estimating her total illicit earnings, which after factoring in her extortion schemes against Margaret and others, I conservatively estimated at over $50,000 in the past year alone. And the grand finale would be a full-screen image of the Secretary of State's website, with the word dissolve highlighted in bright red. I would leave no room for doubt, no crevice for a lie to hide in. The final and most crucial prong was the law enforcement and regulatory angle. A public shaming would be satisfying, but I wanted legal consequences. I would meticulously package my entire investigation, the screenshots, the financial spreadsheet, Margaret's documents, the proof of the HOA's dissolved status, and Karen's anticipated response to the cease and desist, into separate tailored dossiers. One for the county sheriff's economic crimes unit, focusing on the fraud and theft. One for the state's attorney general, focusing on the violations of corporate and consumer protection laws. And a special one for the IRS, focusing on a significant amount of undeclared income. I would mail these packages to be delivered the morning of the HOA meeting, ensuring the official investigations would begin just as her public world was collapsing. While I was busy laying the groundwork for her demise, Karen, predictably, continued to dig her own grave. Buoyed by her victory with the deputies, her overconfidence swelled to magnificent proportions. A few days after our last conversation, I received a letter in my motel room's mailbox, forwarded from my P.O. box. It was from the Serenity Pines HOA. It was a formal eviction notice, giving me 30 days to remove any remaining personal belongings from community property, and it included an itemized bill for several $1,000s for unauthorized occupation, security services, and administrative processing. She had signed it with a flourish. Karen Bishop, President, I smiled. It was even better than the response to the cease and desist I was waiting for. She was serving me evidence on a silver platter. The trap was set. All she had to do was walk into it. The execution phase began. Every step was deliberate, a piece being moved into its final position on the board. I had the lawyer send the cease and desist letter via certified mail. It was a beautiful piece of legal prose, formal and severe, citing penal codes and civil liabilities. As I had predicted with near certainty, Karen's response arrived less than a week later. It wasn't from a law firm. It was from her. The letter, typed on her ersatz HOA letterhead, was a masterpiece of indignant rage and legal ignorance. It was riddled with typos and bizarre, sovereign citizen-style language about the HOA's inalienable authority over community assets. She accused me of harassment, threatened to file a restraining order, and boldly stated that all actions regarding my former property were fully sanctioned by the HOA board and its bylaws. She had signed it. It was perfect. I scanned it immediately, saved it as a PDF with the file name Exhibitor Confession, and added it to my growing digital evidence locker. With that critical piece secured, Margaret and I began our quiet insurgency. We divided a list of residents and started visiting them, one by one. Our approach was subtle, more Socratic than accusatory. We didn't lead with "Karen is a crook." We started with questions. "Hi, I'm Alex for number 12. Margaret and I were just reviewing the HOA finances and had a few questions. Did that last road assessment feel a bit steep to you? Or, I was looking through the old bylaws, and I can't seem to find a section that allows for fines on mailbox colors. Do you remember voting on that?" Slowly, carefully, we built our case in the court of public opinion. Once a homeowner expressed their own frustration or suspicion, we would show them a small piece of our evidence. For Margaret's closest friends, she'd show them the file of Karen's extortionate letters. For others, I would pull up the rental listing for my cabin on my phone. The reactions ranged from quiet shock to sputtering outrage. A coalition was forming, not out of a desire for rebellion, but from a shared sense of being deceived and bullied. Meanwhile, I dedicated my evenings in the motel room to constructing the presentation. It was my magnum opus of data visualization. I used the same software I used for my six-figure corporate clients. The opening slide was a simple, powerful question. Who is the Serenity Pines HOA? I built a narrative slide by slide. I created a dynamic timeline that showed the dates my cabin was rented out, with pop-up bubbles containing excerpts from the glowing reviews praising our host, Karen. I made a bar chart illustrating the escalating special assessments over the past 3 years. I designed a flow chart showing how money was likely being funneled from residents into the HOA account and then used for illicit purposes. The centerpiece was a financial model, a spreadsheet that took the number of nights my cabin was booked, multiplied it by the nightly rate, and projected a total illegal revenue that was well into the 5 figures. I made sure every claim was backed by a screenshot, a document, or a direct quote. And for the finale, the full-page screenshot of the dissolved corporate status. I rehearsed my script, timing it, refining my language to be calm, factual, and devastating. I bought a portable projector and a small screen online. I also designed a one-page summary handout, a fact sheet of Karen's crimes, and printed 50 copies. I was preparing for this meeting like a product launch, and the product was justice. The final countdown began, and the tension was a palpable, electric hum in the air. I watched from a discreet distance as the Henderson family checked out of my cabin, loading their suitcases into their car. Less than 24 hours later, a new vehicle, a minivan with out-of-state plates, pulled into my driveway. A new family, a new rental, another entry into my evidence log. I documented the changeover with my camera, using a telephoto lens from a wooded trail that overlooked my property. The time-stamped photos were uploaded to the cloud, another brick in the wall of evidence I was building. Then, the official agenda for the annual meeting arrived in my email, sent by Karen to the community mailing list. It was a monument to her own arrogance. The agenda items were comical in their self-congratulatory tone. Report on community beautification projects, which I knew was a reference to the expensive new landscaping she'd had done around her own house. Presentation of the annual financial report, which was certain to be a work of pure fiction, and, most ominously, a new item I hadn't seen before. Review of member disciplinary actions and potential expulsions. This was a clear and direct threat aimed squarely at me. She wasn't just planning to defend herself. She was planning to go on the offensive and have me formally banished. It was a rookie mistake, telegraphing her move and further cementing her image as a tyrant. I replied to her email, CCing the general HOA address, which I knew just went to her. Following the proper procedure outlined in the old bylaws for adding an item to the agenda, I formally requested a slot under New Business. The title of my agenda item was deliberately neutral and corporate sounding. A presentation on HOA governance, bylaw compliance, and financial irregularities. I knew the bland title would appeal to her sense of bureaucratic authority while masking the true, explosive nature of its content. To my satisfaction, she replied within the hour with a curt, approved. She clearly thought she could control the narrative, that she could let me have my say and then publicly humiliate me and shut me down. Her hubris was my greatest ally. The day before the meeting, I executed the final step of my preemptive strike. I had 4 large envelopes prepared. Inside each was a binder containing a printed, tabbed, and neatly organized copy of my entire investigation, along with a flash drive containing all the digital files. I drove to the main post office and sent the packages via registered mail with return receipt requested. One was addressed to the head of the Economic Crimes Unit at the County Sheriff's Office. One to the Director of the Consumer Protection Division at the State Attorney General's Office. One to the Criminal Investigation Division of the local IRS field office. The fourth went to the editor of the largest regional newspaper. The packages were timed to be delivered the morning of the meeting. The official gears of justice and public scrutiny would begin to turn just hours before I made my public move. The clock was now ticking down to 0 hour. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. All that was left was for the Queen to make her final, fatal move. The community clubhouse was a small, pine-paneled room that usually smelled faintly of stale coffee and cleaning supplies. For most annual meetings, 5 or 6 people would be scattered among the 30 folding chairs. Tonight, every single chair was filled. More than 40 people were crammed into the space, with latecomers standing along the back wall. When Karen and her husband, a perpetually bewildered-looking man named Bob, walked in, her eyes widened at the crowd. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by a preening smile. She saw the turnout not as a threat, but as a validation of her importance. She clearly believed they had all come to see her hold court. She took her place at the head table, flanked by her 2 board cronies, and banged a small gavel. Welcome, everyone, to the annual meeting of the Serenity Pines Homeowners Association. It's so wonderful to see such a strong community turnout, she chirped. She droned on through the opening pleasantries, her voice oozing a condescending sweetness that set my teeth on edge. She presented her community beautification report, which consisted of a slideshow of her own prize-winning roses. Then came a financial report. She projected a laughably simple spreadsheet onto the wall. It had 3 lines: dues collected, expenses, and year-end balance. The numbers were round and neat and bore no resemblance to reality. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. They were waiting. They were waiting for me. Finally, she reached the end of her agenda. And now, she said, her voice dripping with disdain, under new business we have a presentation. by Mr. Alex Sterling. She gestured dismissively toward me. This was my moment. I walked to the front of the room, my laptop in hand. I felt a wave of nervous energy, but I channeled it into a focused calm. I connected my computer to the projector, my movements precise and unhurried. I turned to face the assembled homeowners, my neighbors. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, anger, and hope. They were counting on me. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady and clear, filling the quiet room. "My name is Alex Sterling. For those who don't know me, I own the cabin at 12 Serenity Lane." I paused for effect. Or at least, I thought I did. A low murmur went through the crowd. I clicked the remote, and my first slide appeared on the screen. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple screenshot from the Secretary of State's official website for our state. The name Serenity Pines Homeowners Association was clearly visible, and next to it, in a large red box I had added, was the word "dissolved according to the state." I said calmly, "Our HOA ceased to exist as a legal entity 2 years ago." Which brings me to my presentation's essential question. Who have we been paying our dues to? The murmur grew louder. Karen shot to her feet. "This is out of order. That document is a forgery. It's fake." Her voice was shrill, panicked. I didn't even look at her. I simply addressed the audience. For anyone who doubts its authenticity, the website address is right there at the bottom of the screen. You can look it up on your phones right now. Several people immediately did just that. I clicked to the next slide. It was a beautiful, sun-drenched photo of my cabin. "This is my home," I said. "But for the last 5 weeks, it has also been known by another name." I clicked again. A screenshot of the rental listing filled the screen. "The Serenity Pines Guest House, available for rent at $295 a night." I let the image hang there for a moment. Then I zoomed in on the host profile picture, a photo of petunias. And next to it, the host's name, Karen B. The gasps in the room were audible. Every eye swiveled from the screen to Karen. Her face, which had been flushed with anger, was now a ghastly, chalky white. The trap had been sprung. The room was dead silent, the homeowners staring, transfixed, at the screen. Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, the color draining from her face. She looked like a cornered animal, realizing too late that the exits were all sealed. I didn't give her a moment to recover. I moved methodically, relentlessly, through the rest of my evidence. Click. The booking calendar appeared, a grid of red squares indicating over 150 nights my home had been illegally rented out in the past year. "This represents a significant stream of income," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion, letting the facts speak for themselves. Click. A collage of guest reviews materialized, each one praising their wonderful host, Karen. I read one aloud. "Karen was amazing. She met us with the keys and even left a welcome basket. We'll definitely be back. It seems the hospitality was excellent." A few bitter chuckles rippled through the audience. Click. The financial chart. A towering bar graph showed the estimated illegal revenue from my cabin alone, the total at the top reading $44,250 estimated pre-tax. I let that number sink in. Then I turned my attention to the rest of the community. "But this was never just about my cabin," I said, my gaze sweeping across the room and landing on Margaret, who gave me a firm, encouraging nod. "This was about a pattern." I put up the first of Margaret's documents, a fraudulent invoice for the aesthetically discordant garden gnome. The absurdity of it drew more murmurs. Then I showed another and another. The fines for weeds, for late newspapers, the bogus emergency assessments. As I showed the evidence, I saw recognition in the eyes of others. Suddenly, a man in the back stood up. She fined me. She fined me $500 because my trash cans were visible from the road for 2 hours after the pickup." A woman near the front chimed in, her voice trembling with rage. "She put a lien on my property, a lien because I was 2 weeks late paying an assessment I never even knew was voted on." The room erupted. The quiet resentment that had been simmering for years boiled over into open revolt. People were on their feet, shouting out their own stories of Karen's petty tyranny and financial extortion. It was a chorus of the victimized finally finding their voice. Karen completely lost control. The mask of the prim and proper HOA president disintegrated, revealing the snarling, vicious bully beneath. Lies. You're all liars, she screamed, her voice cracking. You're just bitter because you can't follow simple rules. I did everything for this community. Everything. She lunged toward the table where my laptop sat, her hands clawed as if to smash it. Her husband, Bob, finally jolted into action, grabbing her around the waist to hold her back as she thrashed and shrieked. Amid the chaos, I held up one final piece of paper, my voice cutting through the noise. It was her signed, belligerent response to my lawyer's cease and desist letter. And here, I announced, my voice booming in the suddenly quiet room, we have the president of a non-existent organization using its fraudulent letterhead to threaten a legal property owner, admitting in writing to her control over the property she was illegally renting. I placed the paper down on the table. I looked directly at Karen, whose struggles had ceased. She was just staring at me now, her face a grotesque mask of pure, undiluted hatred and utter defeat. This isn't an HOA matter anymore, I said, my final words landing like gavel strikes. This is a criminal matter. Comprehensive evidence packages detailing multiple counts of felony theft, wire fraud, and tax evasion were delivered via registered mail this morning to the county sheriff, the state attorney general, and the Internal Revenue Service. I let the full weight of that statement settle in the silent room. I suspect you'll be hearing from them very soon. Karen, the silence was absolute. The fight was gone from her eyes, replaced by the dawning, horrific realization of her new reality. Her power, built on paper-thin lies and loud-mouthed intimidation, had been utterly and irrevocably broken. Without another word, she wrenched herself from her husband's grasp and stormed out of the clubhouse, Bob trailing helplessly behind her. The meeting was over. Her reign was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Just 4 days after the meeting, a county sheriff's patrol car, followed by an unmarked sedan, pulled into Karen's driveway. This time, they weren't there to mediate a civil dispute. They were there with a search warrant. The sight of detectives carrying boxes of financial records out of her house became the talk of the community, and soon the entire county. The evidence I had provided was so thorough, so meticulously organized, that it gave the investigators a complete roadmap to her entire fraudulent enterprise. The local newspaper, having received my evidence package, ran a front-page story with the headline, HOA President Accused of Fraud, Renting Resident's Home. My name was kept out of it at my request, but the details of the laptop presentation that brought down a local tyrant became something of a local legend. Karen was charged with a litany of crimes: grand larceny for the rental scheme, multiple counts of wire fraud for using the internet to advertise and book my property, and extortion for her campaign of intimidation against the elderly residents. The IRS, famously humorless about undeclared income, initiated its own separate investigation into years of tax evasion. The weight of it all crushed her. Faced with an insurmountable mountain of evidence, she was forced to plead guilty to most of the charges. Her house, the one she lorded over the community from, had to be sold to cover her astronomical legal fees and the court-ordered restitution. She had to pay back every single cent she had extorted from Margaret and the others, with interest. And, most satisfyingly for me, a judge ordered her to pay me the full $44,250 I had calculated she'd earned from my cabin. The community, in the meantime, had to pick up the pieces and rebuild. With the old, fraudulent HOA dissolved, the residents had to legally reestablish a new one. This time, the process was transparent and democratic. Town halls were held, and new, clearer bylaws were drafted. These new rules were strictly limited to the essentials: road maintenance, the community well, and snow removal. There were no clauses about the color of mailboxes or the placement of garden gnomes. The power for petty tyranny had been surgically removed. I was approached by a delegation of neighbors and asked to serve on the new board, perhaps even as president. I was flattered, but I politely declined. My goal was never to seize power, only to dismantle an unjust system. I did agree, however, to serve as an informal advisor, helping them set up transparent accounting practices and a secure digital record-keeping system. I finally got my cabin back. It took a professional cleaning crew 2 days to scrub the scent of strangers and Karen's treachery out of the place, but when they were done, it was mine again. I spent that first weekend back just sitting on my porch, a cold beer in my hand, listening to the blissful sound of nothing at all. The peace and quiet I'd sought was finally, truly mine. Looking back, I realized the irony of the situation. I bought this cabin to escape the complexities of my job, to turn off the analytical part of my brain. Yet, it was precisely those skills, the meticulous data collection, the strategic planning, the systematic approach to a complex problem, that allowed me to reclaim my peace. It taught me that you can't always just walk away from a problem. Sometimes, bullies don't stop until they're stopped. Ignoring a tyrant, big or small, only emboldens them. The true weapon against those who build their power on lies and intimidation isn't anger or aggression. It's the cold, hard, unassailable truth. The moral of this story is simple. Never underestimate the quiet ones. The world is full of people who mistake silence for weakness and kindness for an invitation to be exploited. But often, the quiet ones are the ones who are observing, analyzing, and documenting. They're the ones who know that the most effective response to a loudmouthed bully isn't to shout back, but to methodically build a case so strong that it collapses their entire world around them. So, what would you have done in my situation? And for anyone out there who might be dealing with your own Karen in an HOA or any other walk of life, remember this simple lesson. Document everything. Emails, letters, photos, dates, times. The truth, when properly organized and relentlessly deployed, is the most powerful force there is unstoppable. Thanks for listening.